people? Yes. I am pausing the recording. Okay, so we're going to start the recording and it's almost 7 o'clock. I guess before we get started, since we made people wait, those of you that want a second sandwich or or chips, I don't want to compete with that. So come up and get your second sandwich this is a real auction here because there's 6 people are getting up for 6 sandwiches. That's good. Grab more chips, grab more drinks. We're happy to feed you as best we can. I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but next time we're gonna have to get the sandwich order in 24 hours early. Jimmy John's was where are people in the waiting room? Did I lose them? I don't see anybody in the waiting room now. Hold on one second. I'm gonna see. I thought there were people in the waiting room. I guess there's not. Okay, hopefully we let them in. Oh, here, yeah, we did. We do have people in the waiting room. Okay, so they are coming in. All right, so really appreciate, Grace kind of ran everything, but this is the formal recording, so welcome everybody. We're really excited to have this. This is one of our biggest turnouts we've ever had. I think it's a very interesting topical situation that we're certainly dealing with here. We are going to record this and post it on YouTube, so we would hope those of you that are here in the room, if you have a question, Grace does have a microphone she can pass to you if you just don't want to get up. But if you don't mind, just coming up to the front of the room and when you have your questions to ask, and then that way you can, face the camera and everybody can hear exactly what you have to say. And as we're doing, anytime you want to get a drink or more chips, feel free to do that. Vahe is going to be joining us momentarily. So I thought what I would do is, and then I'll have our panel introduce themselves, is kind of give a brief history of why we are where we are. The Big 12 conference is in transition, certainly. There's certainly an opportunity for growth, but there's also causes for concern based on what's happened in recent years. And I thought for those people who were not aware, I would start out with maybe a 4 or 5 minute just discussion. We have handouts for those of you that are here in person of all this information that you can pick up for yourself, so you can kind of keep up. But this first slide is just a little bit about the history of the Big 12. It kind of shows how, a near century-long agreement between like-minded schools and schools with a lot in common has changed so quickly and changed dramatically and changed very frequently in just a few years. The Missouri Valley Conference actually goes back prior to 1928, but the Big Six was formed in 1928 with Iowa State, Kansas State, Missouri, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, and was really a conference of stability and regional agreements, easy travel, again, like-minded universities. Colorado joined in 1948 to make it the Big Seven. Oklahoma State joined in 1960 to form the Big Eight. And I'm a Missouri alum, as a lot of you know. I think a lot of us looked at the Big 12 as just, hey, we're inviting these 4 Texas schools to join our conference. And the Texas schools thought we're taking over a conference, at least Texas did. And that's been, that was a change that was all negotiated in 1996 as the Big Eight became no more and the Big 12 was formally formed. There have been disagreements and issues in the Big 12, I think, with some schools from the get-go. Conference headquarters being one, rules about admission of athletes being another that was upsetting to Nebraska. And we could get in, what I'm trying to do with this is not go on too many sidetracks, because there's so many things we can talk about and there's so many questions that people can ask, and I want to give plenty of time for that. But after some problems and discord in 2010, Nebraska elected to leave for the Big Ten Conference. The Big Ten expanded at that point, and Colorado left for the Pac-12. They and Utah joined the Pac-12. There was a lot that went down through that was, again, caused a lot of disharmony. And in 2011, the first year that the Big 12 stayed at 10 teams, they said, okay, we're going to go to a different philosophy in terms of scheduling, and we're going to stick with 10 teams. But in 2011, Missouri and Texas A&M, not in that order, Texas A&M and then Missouri, joined the Southeastern Conference. And at that point, the Big 12 needed to expand, and they invited West Virginia and Texas Christian join the conference. It's been that way for 10 years. And then if we look at what's happened more recently, the 1st of August of this year, this kind of broke, and the story, and Tim and Vahe could probably reference this better than I can, the timing of this, but in a matter of a week, really, from rumor to fact, Oklahoma and Texas informed the Big 12 that they planned on leaving. Their contract with the Big 12 runs through July 1st, 2025. Most folks think there'll be a negotiated buyout of some sort where they will leave before then, but I'm not convinced that it'll be as soon as some folks might think. But they, kind of blindsided the conference. I think that's very fair to say, saying they were going to leave the Big 12 in 2025. There's a lot of sidebars that we could get into about how, I would argue, particularly Texas kind of harmed the potential growth of the Big 12 throughout this past decade, and possibly even prior to that. But I think that will come up independently rather than me presenting about it. I just want to give you as many facts as I can. The next month, the Big 10, Pac-12, and ACC formed a scheduling alliance, a voting alliance, I guess, some sort of alliance. Nobody quite knows what it's going to consist of, but they are going to play more games against one another. And it was a pretty big deal that the Big 12 wasn't invited to that. That was a disappointment to the Big 12. They had the commissioner of the Big 12 had met with the Pac-12 to try to have a type of alliance with the Pac-12, and they went a different direction. So in response to the loss of the Texas and Oklahoma schools, the Big 12 has invited Brigham Young and has accepted, these schools have accepted membership, BYU, Central Florida, Cincinnati, and Houston to join the conference. One thing I'm sure that might come up is, were these the best choices? What were some other options? What are some potential options in the future? Should the Big 12 expand? And I'm going to remember, I always forget to do this, turn on the live transcript. People like that. And I don't. So I like it for other people, but I'm going to now hide that transcript so it doesn't distract me. But now it's showing up for the recording. And so that's expected. BYU is expected to join in 2023. They basically announced that they don't have a conference that they're in currently, so that's going to be a pretty easy transition. And the other schools, I think it's pretty likely will also join in 2023. But again, Tim and Vahe and Andrew may all have better perspective on that than I do. Sure, Cody. I mean, yeah.
Oh, I was saying, so do you expect to have for a few years a 14?
Well, we'll kind of save that. Let me just do this little presentation. Let's come back to whether there'll be a 14-team conference for a few years. And I think I want everybody to answer that because I don't have all the answers, certainly. And some of these folks are more plugged in than I am. So I'll duck that question. I'm probably going too long in my presentation. Actually, I am. So sorry. This is kind of interesting. This, though, I wanted to again share this data about money in college athletics. It's grown. I've taught sports econ for 15 years. K-State had a $30 million budget when I took over. We're currently at 90 million. But there's a reason that, the SEC and the Big 10 have the most TV money, and they attracted Oklahoma and Texas more than just on-field success. Already, you might say Texas has the biggest budget in college athletics. Why don't they stay in the Big 12? It's a reasonable question. They feel like they can be more competitive in the SEC and make more money, would be my guess. And Texas A&M was second with their budget. Oklahoma is the other highest ranking Big 12 school in eighth. Out of the remaining Big 12 schools, Kansas comes in at number 28 with still $121 million budget is enormous. And then you've got kind of a bunch of teams with West Virginia, Texas Tech, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State between 90 and 102 million. And these other four schools are between 90 and 95 million. The biggest money, I would argue, is in the SEC. Some people might say it's in the Big 10, but 10 of the top 20 budgets out of the top 20 are in the SEC. We could show this entire list and we might reference some of that, but Uconn, as of the pre-pandemic, Uconn had the highest budget for a team not in the Power Five, and they're, if anything, kind of moving away from a school like the Big 12. And then your private schools, Baylor, Vanderbilt, Northwestern, et cetera, they're not in the data. Okay, last thing, and I went too long. Important future dates, so I did want to mention this. CBS contract ends with the SEC at the end of the 2023 season. I think that's super important because ESPN is going to come up a lot. One thing I meant to add on this is the playoffs run through 2026 under its current format, and the playoff contract, if they re-up the contract, they extend the contract prior to 2026, ESPN doesn't have to bid against anyone. And so that gives ESPN a tremendous, amount of monopsony power to be the only buyer of that TV contract. They took over the big CBS TV contract with the SEC effective in the 2024 season. I think there's the potential here that Texas and Oklahoma will stay in the conference for those next 2 years because of this. It's a really kind of messy situation when you start not having that clean break with the TV contract with ESPN prior to 2024. Also worth mentioning, and I think Tim may bring this up, all Pac-12 TV contracts come up at the end of 2024. They're not the strongest and most powerful TV network conference money thing in the world themselves. So, could some of those teams actually leave the Pac-12? I still don't think that's impossible. The Big Ten TV contracts come up in 2025. The reason I say that's not very important is nobody's leaving the Big Ten. They're just not. And nobody's leaving the SEC. And those TV contracts come up in 2034. But I think one of the reasons we have relative stability here is in 2036 is when the ACC's TV deals come up. They have a grant of rights, much like the Big 12. Somebody might ask, what's the grant of rights? Long story short, you're really putting your entire TV money to the group and giving it up for yourself. And you're going to have a difficult time leaving a conference if you have a binding grant of rights. So I'll kind of abbreviate that. And if Notre Dame joins a conference, which the Big Ten would love to have Notre Dame, they are tied into joining the ACC until this time, about 2035, 2036. So that's a brief introduction and hopefully some information for folks. Texas, again, biggest budget, biggest paying. They're Texas. And I thought I would show this video before we introduce our speakers, just to kind of, if I get control click here, let's see if that works. Just to kind of show the way that they are a partner. So I don't know why that's not coming up, but I'll do it this way. My apologies. Okay, text, here it is. Oh, I'm logged in. That's going to help. Okay, so this is just a little 2-minute thing. And when you watch, this is a really clever deal. If you ever watch these SEC shorts, always watch them with the captions on because they add a lot. So this is just a little discussion about what kind of conference partner Texas is, and then we'll have our speakers get started.
Okay, with the
Thank you. I'm probably not. Too many Zooms, all these Zooms. I'm just going to share my screen because that way I can't screw it up. Maybe. Can we see that in Zoom? They can see it? All right.
empty them out of all binding TV rights contracts, unequal pay distribution models, and 70-0 wishbone playbooks, and put them in the tray in front of you.
I think I'm good.
Okay, come on. All right, come on. Welcome to the SEC. Your It Just Means More banner will be mailed to you. Please follow the signs that claim your blowout lost to Alabama. Next. Whoa, 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 sir. That's a lot of baggage. All right, step forward through the scanner. Sir, please empty your front left jacket pocket. Sir, poorly performing school-specific broadcast networks are strictly forbidden in the SEC. Please use the trash can beside you.
I mean, could you make an exception? It's kind of been in my family for about 10 years now, ever since we took that national sports broadcast company to the cleaners. Okay. Okay.
All right, step forward through the scanner. Sir, please check your pockets for any knives, needles, or expectations of wielding Big 12 levels of domineering influence.
Nope. I got nothing.
All right, step forward through the scanner.
Ridiculous. I can do this all day. Guess I'm gonna have to take my shoes off next. Well, with which hand would I do that, sir? With which hand?
This episode of
Okay, we don't have to watch a commercial. All right, so that's kind of my intro. I hope that gives us a little perspective. Again, we kind of want this to be open-ended, but I think what I should do first is introduce our other speakers and let them kind of share a little bit about their backgrounds and their areas of expertise on this. And then I kind of had this to get us started. And then again, we'll get to your question, Cody, and other questions and go from there. Andrew's here. Maybe, well, that'll be the least techie problem thing to have him come up and talk for a moment.
Hey, everybody. It's good to see all of you, both virtually and in person. It's been almost 2 years since I've been back here, so I'm really excited. Appreciate you guys having me here. As far as my background goes, related to tonight's topic. That's okay.
Just making sure. I saw I was singing.
My company, Row AI, was founded about 8 years ago, and one of our projects, one of our software or applications that we build is to quantitatively determine the value of various sports programming, various sports rights contracts. For example, the Big 12 with ESPN. We do not work with the Big 12 or anything collegiately, but we track those data and we measure the value of all these different properties. And we have experience working with one particular network and a couple of other sports series. So as far as relevant experience for tonight, that's where it goes. In addition to that, our company builds applications within motorsports, particularly NASCAR, IndyCar, sports cars, and previously Formula One. And we've also done a little bit of work with one Major League Baseball team a couple of years ago. So we're heavy in the world of sports analytics, particularly real-time sports analytics. But yeah, that's all I've got.
Okay, and I did a horrible job of introducing Andrew. He was one of my students in sports econ a number of years ago, and did a research associateship with the Richmond Fed and a master's in economics. So I was going to have a really great perspective of this. As you introduce yourselves, if you want to give a forecast or a bit of information, that would be great. We'll have Tim Fitzgerald introduce himself next and talk about what he'd like to talk about. Publisher and editor of Go PowerCat, has been covering K-State longer than I've even been here, and I've been here 18 years, I think, and knows a heck of a lot about what's going on with K-State and has his finger on the pulse of things. So Tim can provide a little K-State perspective and talk about, again, run the conversation wherever he wants to go.
Thank you, sir. Good to see everyone. My wife and I started PowerCat Illustrated magazine in 1998, and we moved back to Manhattan. I've been in the traditional newspaper business for years, helped the Wichita Eagles start a K-State sports magazine, and in December of 98, we started up what is now GoPowerCat.com. So we went from a magazine with a website to a website with a magazine to just a website after we shut down the print a few years ago. I graduated from K-State in 86, started covering K-State sports in the mid 80s when I was working at the Collegian. So I've been around this for quite a while. And yeah, I have a great interest in conference realignment, expansion, always have, predating the last round and even predating the Big 12's formation in 96. So I'm fascinated with this topic. I'm fascinated with all the moving parts that go into why conferences change directions and who should belong in where. And I'm not getting my way because neither Tulane nor UNLV were invited. So while the road trips they did invite were fun, but I did not get Las Vegas and New Orleans, and I'm still bitter. And I'll be bitter for a long time. But that's it. I'll turn it over to the star of the show, Vahe.
Vegas versus Provo.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
We We have to be on our good behavior here as we want to welcome our new friend. Vahe Gregorian, I've known Vahe actually for, gosh, 30 years, I guess, ish, more, I think, about 30. And I know Vahe is covering this from all sorts of different angles. When I knew him, he was covering Missouri sports, but he's been to multiple Olympics, covered a lot of things, and is going to give us a national perspective. And again, if I keep rambling about people, nobody wants to hear that, but we have a great panel. So Vahe's going to talk for a moment.
Thanks, Dan. I'll try not to be as bitter as Tim. Hey, I just a little background. I grew up in the Northeast and came out to Missouri for grad school in '86. I think the first time I was ever in Manhattan was as part of the Big 8 Skywriters Tour, which was when all the media that covered the Big 8 schools got on a bus for about 10 days and went to each campus. And back then, the stadium, the field was a little different. It was in tatters. And I can't remember the family that won the lottery, but that was a big investment in the change, but of course, not as big an investment as Bill Snyder became. So it was a different time. I was at the Post-Dispatch in St. Louis for 25 years, and I covered a lot of college sports and Olympics. And then I came over here to Kansas City in 2013, and the job now is kind of jack of some trades, certainly master of none, and but try to keep the head on the swivel and do a lot with the Chiefs and Royals, and certainly try to keep my eye on college sports, but has not quite been at the forefront the way it used to be. Certainly I'm old enough to remember what I would consider, I guess, 1996 and the formation of the Big 12 was semi-seismic, but I do think all the events in 2010 and 2011 really redefine the landscape in another way for me. And everybody else might be less naive than me, but I remember thinking, like, I didn't realize till then that actually football drives everything. And I think we've seen that in some cases with how KU has been sort of perceived in all this, but also that TV drives football. And I thought things had stilled a little bit, and I guess I didn't see that we were going to be back in flux. And now I find myself seeing what's here on the surface, but trying to ask myself what the end game of this really is. We're at such a crossroads of so many things between, just start with, prominence of the transfer portal and the obviously the 12-team playoff concept, and realignment again, NIL issues. And I find myself thinking, this is amateur sports. So there's just a lot of questions about where this is all going. We've all heard different views about, or different notions about, the possibility of sort of breaking off from the NCAA, that might be in there. And there certainly were scattered reports, or at least suppositions, that what this SEC move might portend would ultimately be more of a breakaway for football itself, that we might shake down to, I don't know, some kind of tier of 50, 60 teams, maybe fewer, and start getting more streamlined into almost an NFL model. I don't think that's too many leaps in logic ahead, but I think it's probably decades ahead, and it may not ever come to pass. But I just think that anything that can monetize stuff is going to happen. And I do think, and Tim and Dan in particular, I don't know exactly your feelings about this, but you might share some of my feelings about it. Something's lost in this. I mean, and I can oversimplify it just by talking about Missouri, Kansas, but I do think that the feeling of rivalries and things that you understood and saw year in, year out, it's not really the same. Things are kind of concocted now, and ultimately they'll lead to, reformed way of doing things, but it's not as captivating to me in a lot of ways as it used to be.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is people, ask me, and a lot of people know Missouri alum and follow the program pretty closely. And people here after the Missouri left the Big 12 10 years ago, a lot of people would say, don't you miss the Big 12? And in a way, you kind of did. I mean, it was fun to have, my alma mater come to town. We're coming back next year and play the Cats and everything. But, I missed the Big 8. And that was, to me, when things were, the big money wasn't involved in it as much, and it was just more pure, I guess, to kind of build off what Vahe said. The other thing I would mention is, I think there is a chance for a big seismic shift, and that's why when I brought up those dates, I think that date of 2036, when everybody's TV rights are going to be kind of up, that could be a tipping point. And as we know, when the tipping point is 2036, just like we thought, a lot of people thought, I've always had skepticism about Texas's level of commitment to this conference, but with the 2025 date, you're surprised that things break in 2021. So I think to some degree, the dominant thing to do as we are putting together a conference and trying to move forward for K-State is it probably is kind of a 10-year time horizon that you're looking at, where you can hopefully lock in a fair amount of stability, and then you hope to build those relationships and brands and have the league be strong enough where you can move forward from there. But I think realistically, they always talk about these 50-year agreements, these lifetime agreements. I mean, everybody in college athletics has pretty much been out for themselves to a varying degree, and I think you have to look at it that way. And I don't know if anybody else wants to jump into the panel, but I know we had some questions, so I'll just,
Hey, Dan, can I just jump in with one little side point?
Of course.
I'm a little Missouri centric on this, but I remember, after Nebraska and Colorado left, I don't know if we ever thought things settled down, but then the Texas A&M thing happened, and then there was an apparent feeling again that, okay, maybe that'll be it. And then all of a sudden, Missouri was making the move, and that came right after David Boren of Oklahoma made that statement about how even after things have been settled down, they're not going to be a wallflower in realignment. And this isn't exactly what Travis Goff said the other day to some reporters covering KU, but I thought it was rather interesting that even now, as we sit here looking at the new Big 12, a 12 school Big 12, that, or potentially, I guess I should say, till we see everything shake out, Travis Goff is basically leaving the door open. And I thought that was interesting, but what made me think of that was your comment that it's really everybody, for every school for themselves. And I guess maybe that's in a certain sense how it has to be, but I think, it can engender a little cynicism when you feel like that's always looming.
Yeah, Tim did a really good YouTube video on that, actually, because it's not the sentiment that's offensive. It's the fact that you can't even let the ink dry before you're saying, look at me, and we're not as committed to the Big 12 as you might hope. So I think absolutely, yeah, that's frustrating. And Tim, I don't know if Tim wants to say anything else about that.
There's nothing wrong with popping open a beer, but don't do it at the funeral. I mean, that's kind of what he did. He was like, this is the worst timing in the world. We all look, if KU gets a Big Ten invite, they got to go. I mean, the money is so incredible, and we're going to see a lot of separation between the SEC, Big Ten, and everyone else, and we are already. But saying it when he said it was just, what are you doing, man? Rookie move.
Any questions? We had Cody's. We come back to that, I guess. Okay. You can come up if you want. Our Econ Club treasurer, Ben, who I've decided I'm going to put to work on ordering sandwiches next time, is coming up.
Hello, all folks out in Zoom land. Thanks, speakers, for coming. So my question is a little bit about COVID. Obviously, COVID impacted athletic departments in a variety of ways. They were crunched for monies in ways they hadn't envisioned before. Some of them are probably hurting financially. Do you think that sort of created a bigger impetus towards this realignment move, or you think that had no effect? This is just like contract deals are up in a couple of years. That's what sort of started this all, or what are your thoughts on that aspect of this change in collegiate like athletic landscapes?
You know, in K-State's case, I'm not sure they play Stanford and Arlington without the COVID issue, to try to close the gap in the budget. Here comes the Econ guy can answer this pretty well, but I do think there was a sense that no matter how much money you have, COVID exposed how fragile you can be, because if you have money, you're spending it. You're not sitting on it. So if you have a drop in that, all of a sudden you've got a financial issue you got to face. So maybe it made people aware. I think more likely it was just the timing of the contracts coming up and Oklahoma and Texas getting an offer they couldn't refuse.
Yeah, I generally agree with that. I think we've talked about this off and on for several years. I mean, since I've been coming here 6-7 years ago now, we figured it'd be around 2022 where this would shake up, and it's happened about 12 months earlier for the precise reasons that Tim said. So economically, yeah, like you said, there's just a little more incentive to get this through and get this done now. But I would say, just broadly speaking, when it comes to sports rights, it's usually about 2 to 3 years in advance, and this just happened to be about 12 months sooner. So.
Yeah, I think if other schools were involved, I'd be more sympathetic to that, to the COVID thing, man. I mean, not that everybody wants more money, as brought up, but Texas and Oklahoma, I mean, they're the ones that really started this round, right? And so for them to claim poverty is pretty tough sell. In my opinion. It's interesting. There's an article recently out that Rutgers athletic department is $250 million in debt, I think. And those kind of schools, and again, they took a deal from the Big Ten that was junior membership, for lack of a better word, and that certainly didn't help them. The one thing about the SEC, and I can say as a Missouri alum, out of the 4 recent additions, you know, we bring the least TV presence to the table, but in the SEC, when you join, there's no penalty phase, there's no junior membership. You get a full share of revenues from day one, which is a lot of money. But yeah, I think I have a hard time sympathizing Texas and OU.
Hey, Dan, you'd be, I think, uniquely qualified to speak to this, or certainly I'd like to hear what you think about it. Do you think in the end, Missouri was better off not getting in the Big Ten and going to the SEC, all things considered?
As someone that kind of thought maybe it would bump my PhD up a couple of notches if we went to the Big Ten, I can say absolutely we were better off going to the SEC. I don't think, and it's still sorry. But yeah, I think that you look at Nebraska, you know, and what's happened, and they've done some of these self-inflicted things, but goodness knows Missouri's made plenty of mistakes in the last decade in terms of some of the coaches they've hired and some of the things they've done. But yet, you know, they were able to hire the most recent coach. Arkansas wanted to hire him, and they were able to. If Missouri's in the Big Ten, they don't get Coach Drink, I don't think. The stability is better. Again, some of the self-inflicted wounds Missouri had, having that full share of money from day one helped keep things moving better than they would have otherwise. So I think that it was, at the time, I thought, you know, Missouri was kind of, and I'm from rural Missouri. If you're in Southwest Missouri or Southeast Missouri, you think, well, of course we should be in the SEC. If you're from St. Louis, you think it's a Big Ten thing at the time that it happened. But I think most of the fan base and the alums have really gotten behind this. And in retrospect, I think that it's definitely been the best thing for the overall health of the athletic program. I feel strongly about that, Vahe. Yeah. But we want to talk about K-State more, I know. Other questions? Yeah, Cody. You come on up if you want, yeah.
Hello. So my question was a little bit simple. Where obviously with the current numbers, depending on how OU and Texas, how long they decide to stay in, we could potentially have the Big 12 be a 14-team conference. So I was just kind of wondering about some of the logistical hurdles of that, how much that would change the landscape of the Big 12 in those sort of 2-ish years when that would be a case. So yeah, just kind of like a general, I guess it's almost just like a jumping off point.
So yeah, I guess, and then, so maybe if you had to guess, and this is a guess, how many more seasons do Texas and Oklahoma play in the Big 12? I could give my answer. It's with very little confidence. But I think it's going to at least be this year and next year. And I kind of lean toward until the CBS thing comes out. I kind of lean toward that. I don't know. I'd say 2 or 3 years. I don't think it's going to be just one. Andrew's probably actually let's have it. And we know if they stay 3 more years that BYU will be playing at that point. And so that would be, and you know, a 1 year or 2 year thing, they're going to make it work. And I know Tim has some suggestions on, you know, you make Texas go to the as many of the new schools as you can. You can't give them all road games. I think there's laws against that, but anyway, okay, Andrew.
So I wanted to ask you, help me jog my memory, the CBS deal. Have there been discussions about ending that early?
There's been a lot of rumors that maybe that ESPN could buy them out. But again, I wonder if honestly, and maybe Tim can address this. I mean, these rumors clearly came from Texas A&M, and then they were confirmed a week later.
That's right. Yeah.
I kind of wonder if this wouldn't have been pushed off at least 6 months to another year had word not gotten out, because there was a movement. People were kind of having this momentum to saying, we're going to sign the 12-team playoff with ESPN. Everything's going to work great. And then, that whole thing was to favor the SEC and to favor the new ESPN. I don't know. So maybe Tim can jump in here real quickly. And if my question even makes sense, Tim.
No, it made sense. I personally think everything will break loose after the 22 season. For 23, everyone will be in place. I think that's what the Big 12 is probably working towards, is to get the buyout, whatever that number is going to be, $75 million a school, and then use some of that money to help the other schools get out of the American Conference a year early. And because you don't want to be in flux. You don't want to have 13 teams and then 14 or, however it would work out. As Dan said, if they ever had an overlap, I was in favor of sending Oklahoma and Texas on the road to every new school to help bolster their visibility in terms of TV value. And I'm sure the other Big 12 schools wouldn't appreciate having to play at Oklahoma and Texas those years because of that, my own pettiness. But I think everything will break loose. I think it'll settle down. And until that Pac-12 conference contract gets near, I think we got another round of this. I think both the SEC and Big Ten are going after Pac-12 schools, as weird as that sounds. I think geography's been forgotten here. Rivalries have been forgotten. It's all about TV entities, and there's 4 pretty good ones out west. And I think if you start scheduling with pods, you add 4. And I think that's what the Big 12 is waiting on. If USC and Oregon and Washington and I don't assume UCLA or Stanford being the 4th move into one of those conferences, there's going to be some schools like Arizona State just hanging out there that it would be a good fit for the Big 12. So we'll see. But I think 23 is when this round kind of settles down, but I think we'll get it again around 25.
I don't know if Vahe wants to jump in on that or not. I may have been convinced to change my answer because the CBS, but it's just that CBS thing is a big deal. I will say that. And so maybe you just give CBS the rights to have Oklahoma and Texas for a year, because they're not going to pay more money at this point. I mean, they've had a sweetheart deal for 30 years with the SEC, and they actually gave, everybody says that CBS didn't bid on the SEC. They gave a really competitive bid, but at that point the SEC was kind of bitter. Again, in Econ, we say don't think about sunk costs. Just because you gave CBS a bargain for all those years, they were willing to pay. I still think it was a big mistake for the SEC to break from CBS, but maybe they kind of knew it would be easier to move with ESPN and somewhat collude and get these schools. But yeah, go ahead. If you want to even try that one about the teams playing a 14-team league or not, I mean, it's highly speculative, obviously. Tim made some really strong points.
The only thing I was going to add is I think Tim's reasoning is so sound, and I like that Tim brought up the pod word. I haven't studied this enough to feel like I can say it with real conviction, but I think even going back to the first wave of realignment, there was a lot of talk about sort of quad pod systems being part of this, right? Where you can have, where the geographical sprawl is a little, I don't know if contained is the right way to put it, but makes a little more sense everything from rivalry wise to budgetary to just symmetry of all of it. So you can see 6 teams across the board with divided by 4, right? I mean, it's an easy mechanism to see. I'm not sure that that's still in vogue. That's exactly what's going to happen. But I've sort of thought that that's what all this sets up at some point. And I remember in that first round, again, that like a lot of talk for, where if the Big 12 was going to dissolve, then, what would happen to Kansas and Kansas State, and, where they'd fit in that situation if it wasn't, if there's 4 16-team conferences, one of them isn't called the Big 12. Now I don't know where that is now, and I'd be certainly interested to hear what anybody else has to say about that. But it's just food for thought.
I could do a whole session on pod scheduling. I'm strangely obsessed with pod scheduling because it makes so much sense. It frustrates me that nobody's really looking at it. The Big 12 is already discussing what divisions, even at 12, doing pod scheduling makes better sense than having one set of standings than literally dividing your conference, which is symbolic if you ask me, instead of having one set of standings the general fan base wouldn't know about who's in what pod. It's all for scheduling in the background.
Well, and I do think there's a good chance the SEC moves that direction at 16. I think that's probably a slight favorite over the 8-team division. Would be my read of it. But and again, the thing is that the assumption of the national media is that this Pac-12 is the 4th conference and they're really stable, and it's just I don't know if the SEC would do that or not. I go back to what Tim was saying, because when you're at 16, you're barely a conference if you have more than 16 teams, but I know that's not what this is about. But the SEC has at least always been able to kind of, they claim that they're all about everybody, the Mississippi States and the South Carolinas and whoever. And you start to get above 16, it becomes rather cumbersome. Other questions? And by the way, just as a preview, I'm thinking we might go a little past 8, which we usually stop at 8. But if people have to go, they obviously have to go. But Travis, yeah, I couldn't tell if you were leaving or coming for a question.
All right, hi everybody. So in 2016, I believe the Big 12 looked at expansion, and there were 12 finalists. A lot of familiar names on there from this last round of expansion. But one thing that I think is interesting, and I was going to ask what your thoughts on this were, it was thought of that Colorado State would have been in that top 4 in 2016. And something else that people were talking about is Central Florida was a far different school in 2016 than it is now. So what do you think was the biggest factor in terms of that swap, or if you think it's different teams that swapped? And then follow up, I guess, on that, if that 2016 expansion were to happen, what teams do you think it would have been?
Why don't we start with Tim on that one?
Well, it's a great question. And people wonder why it didn't happen. It didn't happen for one reason. Texas had a voting block of Oklahoma State, and Texas Tech to vote with it on everything. And they had enough votes to veto anything they wanted. So they didn't want to bring in 2 new schools. So they shot down pretty much any expansion by the Big 12. They maybe did it in the background, but Texas didn't want it, so it didn't happen. And that's been the story of the Southwest Conference and then the Big 12. Texas has gotten their way for literally their entire history of post-World War II sports. And it's going to be intriguing to watch what happens. I'm not sure who they would add it. I think Cincinnati was certainly in at that point. And oddly, another school that just dropped off the radar is Uconn. And as Dan mentioned, they've got a big budget, but they've gone independent in football because they rejoined the Big East in basketball, which doesn't have football anymore. And I think they're just going to go drop down their football program or shut it down, which is interesting. But that was Uconn was kind of getting a push from ESPN because that's their local school in Connecticut. So that's all changed. I'm a big fan of adding Colorado State only because I want to go to Colorado. And people aren't paying enough attention to my feelings in this whole thing. And I'm continuing to be bitter.
Tim, I'm with you, man. I think we had talked in passing about who the Big 12 would add. And there's, Dr. Keister and I have worked on some stuff about this, but Colorado State's not exactly a sexy pick, but I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't mind it. And it's close-ish to Brigham Young. But yeah, I think it could work.
I'm going to share something with you that I was going to use for my own purposes, but this was a slide I put together in 2016. So I'm too lazy to edit these things. So this was, and let me share this with the Zoom people if I can do that. Hold on. I should be better at this after all these years of doing it. But anyway, these were kind of where I had them rated at the time. And I did, those were in order what I felt at the time. And then other ones that were included here. And so you can see that 3 of these 4 ended up making the cut. I would be less excited about Connecticut today than I would have been in 2016 for the reasons that were mentioned. I think Memphis gets overlooked a lot. I just think geographically, market-wise, they bring a fair amount to the table. And then again, Louisville, this didn't come up. This was prior to 2016, but Oklahoma was pushing for Louisville. So there was a lot of push toward Louisville in Texas. I don't know who they gathered up to stop that one, but they were against Louisville because of perceived academics. But this is Nate Silver did an article, which Andrew has done. I can't even, other than saying, Andrew, why don't you do this? Was my contribution to our project. Nate Silver tried to estimate the TV presence of these teams. And again, BYU is a big one, and that's why they're still a good candidate. I think they were a good candidate this entire time. But this is something that TV networks are aware of what Nate Silver does. And so these were schools that I felt like at the time would have brought a lot to the table in that order. And again, it's nice to see that the Big 12 took 3 of those schools. Houston's gotten better at sports, but they don't have a hugely devoted fan base in the state of Texas, even within Houston, is my understanding. So that's they have a big alum with a lot of money though, so that's good. Any other? Oh, hey, I don't know. We kind of ran over you there. Anything you wanted to say?
No, nothing else on that, Dan.
Yeah, the Big 12 really went wrong the first round in 10 and 11 because Cincinnati and Louisville were on tap. And, there was pushback against Louisville's academics. And oddly enough, West Virginia pushed back against Cincinnati. And now they've been added. So you get into perceptions of schools. And we spend so much time looking at schools for the moment. South Florida is no good in football. They're not good in basketball. Let's not add them. But you saw those numbers. That would have been my 4th choice. Plus, it gives you another Florida school. And because you've created a couple islands now. You solved West Virginia with Cincinnati, but now you've got Central Florida and BYU out on islands. So the next round, if they do it, we'll try to solve those, I think.
So I had a question for Tim. I think you're pretty well equipped to answer this. So we've done a lot of studying on TV ratings and schools' effects on them. One school that is not very impactful is Boise State, but they are consistently good. Like they're highly ranked. And so when I think of a model where you look at the contribution of viewership into a game, one part is the school itself, the other part is how good the school is, how close the game is, what time, what network, all that. Would it be, how do you project a Boise State that is not implicitly popular, but consistently good? Because that's the one school I haven't seen on any list, but I want to get your thoughts on that. Because just going off the data, if they're good, they're a good at. If they're not good, they're terrible. So I want to get your thoughts on that.
What's interesting about this is there's 2 elements here. There's the athletic side of it, which the Big 12's leaned into, and the academic side of it, which is what that alliance is all about. I mean, the alliance was entirely about the presidents and chancellors thumbing their nose at the SEC, saying, we think of academics first. We think of inclusion in terms of number of sports more than you do. We're better than you, and they thumb their nose. The Big 12 really didn't mess with academics too much as far as we can tell. I mean, West Virginia is not acceptable in any way to the Big Ten, and probably not the ACC. So they're kind of stuck with the Big 12. And Memphis is also not regarded highly for academics. But if you want to talk about a school within the educational community, not respected one iota, it is Boise, because they literally used to be a junior college, and they are perceived throughout academic circles as still being a glorified junior college. And what that causes, though, there's an athletic layer in here, and Dan mentioned it with the admission rules. When the Big 12 was formed, Nebraska wanted more of what was then called Prop 48s. They built their program on kids that couldn't get in other schools, and Texas said, no, we don't want any, but we'll let the conference have one. So I'm not sure what Boise's admission standards are, but there might be some concern that they're at some advantage with who they can get into school compared to other people. I'm not sure about that, but Boise is a tough sell to the presidents and chancellors, who at the end of the day are the ones who make the final decision.
Tim said what I was going to say better than I could have. I think they're a non-starter, and they're at a different level of academics. That's not a compliment. So, and this is going on YouTube. I should probably be careful, but it's what it is, and that's the way academics see it. And I think it's a non-starter. I've seen their name thrown around, but I think it's being thrown around by the same people that were saying Missouri was going to oppose Texas joining the SEC because they were getting bad information. So I don't see it. Other plenty of places we can go. Anybody else with thoughts, questions? Here we go. Robert's getting up here.
So with the kind of concentration of talent in the SEC, do you see a future where maybe the NCAA or something steps in to maybe limit any further movement towards the SEC, or like you were talking about, even them reaching out west for TV reasons? Do you ever see that impacting performance or the income for the other conferences to a point where the NCAA would need to step in and stop that?
They can't. The NCAA can't do that. They don't have that level of authority, and as was brought up earlier, I think if they tried, the SEC would say, okay, we're going to do our own thing. The NCAA is dealing with enough issues in terms of, they didn't want name, image, and likeness. They didn't want all these changes that have happened, but they've had such a, I guess, illegal, if you look at the way the courts have interpreted it, cartel in place to not pay these players. I feel really strongly about, I know I love college athletics too, but I don't love it more than what I think of as the way free market should work, and how workers, and essentially the ball players are workers, shouldn't be exploited. And I look at that first, and I look at what's best for Missouri or K-State or whatever athletic program second, although I think this is actually going to prove to be better for competition than a lot of people think, because this name, image, and likeness stuff, this isn't at all your question, but this name, image, and likeness stuff, if you're Skylar Thompson is going to make more than the third string quarterback at Alabama once this gets put into place, if things are kind of working the way we want them to. So, the NCAA has been shown, they've lost court case after court case recently. They're not going to take on, this athletic conference can't add teams because we don't want them to. That's outside of their purview. And it's really, unless someone wants to say that I'm interpreting it incorrectly, but yeah.
Well, there's two directions we can go with this. One would be the general feeling that the SEC is attempting to build a super conference. So this was just their start, and eventually they're going to invite Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, the best of the ACC, Clemson, Florida State, and build this elite football class that excludes anyone they don't feel is elite. I think that will run into legal problems, just like the soccer league did in Europe, where even if they get down the road with that, I don't think it'll fly. I don't think you can just decide we're going to exclude you from this. You have to be a little more inclusive than that. But the other is what Dan said, the NIL, which is a topic I really despise, because there's no good impact for college sports, but I agree with it. I think there's no reason why the NCAA should have ever been able to ban a young athlete from profiting from their own name and image. It's insane to me that they ever thought that was okay. But now, I mean, Gary Patterson at TCU just came out and said, we've got a problem. SEC is throwing around money because they have so many businesses willing to pay players for name, image, and likeness that we're going to see a flood of transfers from our schools to those schools. So it's really not, the bleed out's not going to be on the recruiting trail, which it already is happening. It's going to be with, and I'm just saying, I'm just putting this name out there, a Deuce Vaughn, some kid that comes out of nowhere from, you know, a 3-star recruit that the SEC absolutely didn't want. And all of a sudden is an All-American caliber running back. Hey, come to Georgia. You can be the spokesperson for this Ford dealership and they'll pay you $500,000 a year. Now, the schools aren't supposed to participate in that, but I don't know how the hell the NCAA would ever stop the schools from being quietly involved in that. They can't enforce the rules they have, let alone that.
And getting back to your point, it's not that what Tim brought up, there's the potential for antitrust litigation from the existing schools. I don't think the NCAA would be the ones to bring that up if that happened. So that was being a little more technical. There are potential landmines if SEC overreaches or what have you, because antitrust is its own beast, and we could go into that.
And just back to what Tim said, I think it was at SEC Media Days where Jimbo Fisher, the Texas A&M coach, said, we've always had name, image, likeness. It's just that it's legal now because it's, you know, sanctioned. And I do think there's a little bit of a Pandora's box here, as Tim kind of alluded to. I mean, it's I don't think it was intended to promote free agency in this, and that's you always have to contend with unintended consequences in these cases. And I don't know about how this is all going to get legislated. And I don't know how much the horses are out of the barn already. I mean, you see some really good stuff that's come of it. But it's just kind of strange when the Alabama quarterback's making $1 million a year and the Missouri offensive tackles getting a deal with Men's Warehouse for a suit. I mean, that's just one little comparison point. But look, maybe there's a great equalizer in this, but I don't know if bidding war was where we wanted to go.
Yeah, and I guess I take more of the point Vahe brought up at first. I think this is just shining a light on a lot of what's already been there, particularly in basketball. So the money has been there. It's just maybe it's a little more out in the open. Other questions? All right.
So again, so I was reading somewhere that said that they gave a list of the top sports that were receiving, or like athletes that were receiving money because of the name, image, and likeness bill. There is like a surprising amount of like money going into other sports I didn't initially consider. So like like volleyball or gymnastics have a lot more money than I would have thought. Do you think like those sort of image deals could increase like the popularity or like contracts with like TV networks of those sports? How like that bill could affect other sports besides football or basketball?
I have a little knowledge of this, but if anybody else wants to jump in, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know if that'll really impact popularity. I think you're probably seeing specific businesses that find, if you own some kind of, golf shirts, you're going to want to bring in golfers, to talk about your products. I'm happy that those sports are getting that love, though. Those athletes deserve it. I hope they get more of that. I'm more just mystified why any business would pay a college athlete $1 million when they'd never taken a snap as a starting quarterback. That's just bizarre to me. And on top of all that, it's not good for your locker room. I mean, the comparison here was between Alabama and Missouri, but how about the guy that erupts as maybe the star or whatever at Alabama, who's not getting that while the quarterback is. That's NFL locker room issues right there. And I don't think college coaches are going to appreciate that very much. I think a lot of college coaches say, well, I'll just go to the league if I got to deal with all this too.
So to answer your question, the people that I know of that are receiving those huge NIL deals are people that have some sort of viral social following, whether it be on Instagram or some other type of social media. So to me, that's actually the pure monetization of what NIL was intended to do. Here's this person who, if they weren't competing for LSU or wherever it is, would be making all this money with their social media. We're now going to allow it. That's my understanding, is that these people that are receiving these pretty big deals are actually worth it, because they're what's the word for it? Fashion centers, darn it, trendsetters. What's the word? Influencers. They're influencers. I'm old. And because they're influencers, they actually are probably worth it from the business perspective. It's not hidden recruiting like Dan Lambert giving everybody at Miami however many $1,000 he gave everybody on the football team, which, at least getting back to Tim's point, was across the board, but it was clearly, hey, I've got money, I'm going to throw it, get these players. Which again, I can't have a problem with from my beliefs in the world, even though, I like to see more competitive balance. I also like to see free markets. So.
One of the first NIL deals that pop out was a website like mine, but it's a Texas A&M website called TexAgs, which is probably the biggest school-specific website and the best, to be honest. It's an amazing website for a school-specific site, and they're also independent. But they paid 2 A&M players $10,000 a piece for an interview. Now, that wasn't really about NIL. That was $20,000 of advertising that they got, because guys like me are still talking about it, and it showed everyone in the A&M market who the big gun was. So there's a lot of that going on. People with money wanted to make sure everyone notices they have power and influence.
This is a little different point, and in a sense, it might extend to the pro situation more than in colleges. But Tim, I'd be interested to know if you've had this concern at all. We've seen the proliferation of media driven by the institution, the internal. So K-State has its, the Chiefs have theirs. And there have been times where I can tell you I've been denied a request through the Chiefs for something I want to work on, and discovered that it was percolating from their internal mechanism. And when you have things like that, and the players forum, is that what it's called? The website where players write for this forum, it's not hard to envision a situation where media access is a paid thing, or some way to monetize that. I don't think I see that coming in the college model exactly, but as the COVID era has affected our access to players and coaches in a lot of ways, I keep letting my mind wander to things that will continue to regress or progress depending on your perspective on how that's all going to work. And you can see it getting more insulated and more driven by the institution, whether it's a professional team or a school.
We're past 8 o'clock. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions if anybody wants to ask them. I know you all have been here since 6:15, so maybe I'm rambling too much. But does anyone have any? Maybe one last question, or no? I can't tell if you're just like, I got a T-shirt. Okay, cool.
After we're done, I'll be holding a pod Zoom meeting from whenever we start till midnight, because that's how much fun.
Tim's really good. If you, like I said, he has his daily deliveries. It's like I couldn't do those because I don't have a good editor. I'm not a good editor. I can't keep these things to 3 minutes. It's like I just get warmed up, and then people are like, "Oh man," he just keeps hearing himself talk like I'm doing now. So, one last question or no? Last chance. Our president just shook her head like, I think it's time to stop. So we listen to Grace. Okay, well, thanks everybody, and thanks again to our guests for being here. And we'll be back October 14th, right here, for our next meeting with Randy Sims, former chief legal counsel at Cerner. That's gonna be a lot of networking and career advice. So we hope to see everybody back then. But thanks for coming, everybody. And thanks again, Tim. Bye. Appreciate it. You're welcome. Thanks for, please put your trash in the boxes. Be really careful with it. My folks on Zoom, unless somebody needs to talk to me, I'm going to shut down the Zoom. Thanks for coming, everybody. All right, I don't see anything in the chat. All right, bye.